The last embers flicker against the pre-dawn chill. A mountain man stirs, his movements stiff with cold, his skin numb. There are no comforts here, just the stark reality of survival. He prods the dying fire, cinches his gear, and grasps his rifle. Another day begins. Another day of vigilance in a land where death is a constant shadow. Out here, life hangs by a thread. A single misstep can be your last. Grizzlies can dismember a man in seconds. Storms can entomb you. Rivers can claim you. And then there's the silence. Days, weeks, months without another human voice. Just your own thoughts for company, often spiraling inward. Some men endure, others lose their minds. Is it the unseen dangers lurking in the dark? Is it the land itself, patiently waiting for a moment of weakness? Or is it something far more insidious, something you never anticipate? We're starting with the kind of danger that strikes without warning, the kind that kills in an instant. Danger number 1. Hostile wildlife. Here, death isn't a distant threat. It's a living presence. Nothing brings it faster than a grizzly bear. A mature male is a powerhouse of muscle and aggression, towering over a man when standing, larger than a horse. A single blow can devastate. A bite can shatter bone. Grizzlies don't hunt humans, but they don't fear them either. Cross their path at the wrong moment, and you won't hear a warning growl, just a sudden rush of fur, a roar that rattles your very bones, and an explosion of pain. Hugh Glass learned this in the brutal late summer of 1823. Moving through dense undergrowth near the Grand River, his rifle at the ready, he encountered a mother grizzly protecting her cubs. Before he could react, she was on him, hitting him like a battering ram, knocking him off his feet. Claws tore at him, the impact leaving him disoriented. He hit the ground, the bear's immense weight pinning him down. Desperate, he drew his knife, a last, slim hope. The blade found its mark, but she held firm, her crushing grip tightening, her hot breath on his face. He fought, but against her sheer power, it was a futile struggle. When his fellow trappers arrived, rifles raised, Glass was barely clinging to life. Practical men of the frontier, they concluded his wounds were mortal and he wouldn't survive the night. They left him with minimal supplies and 2 men to bury him when he finally succumbed. But Glass refused to die. His incredible journey of survival became one of history's most celebrated tales. Glass's legend spread across the frontier, but he wasn't the only one to face a grizzly's fury. Jedediah Smith, renowned for his discipline and unwavering resolve, was blindsided by a grizzly that almost claimed his life. Riding ahead of his group, scouting the Black Hills, he was struck without warning. The bear burst from the brush, jaws clamping down, knocking him clean off his horse. The world spun as he hit the ground, claws tearing through his coat, ripping deep. His men found him barely conscious, broken and bleeding, yet somehow still breathing. Most would have perished, but Smith refused to. He ordered his men to patch him up. With no doctor or medicine, they did their best, working through his pain. His wounds never fully healed. His face was permanently disfigured, leaving him unable to completely close one eye for the rest of his life. But he survived, and in that harsh world, survival was all that mattered. Grizzly attacks were frequent, and survival was far from guaranteed. Muzzle loaders were too slow, offering only one shot. Miss, and the bear would be on you before you could reload. Climbing a tree offered little escape, as grizzlies could climb too. Some men bravely stood their ground, hoping a precise shot would drop the beast. Sometimes it worked, often it didn't. And if the bear didn't kill you outright, infection might. With no doctors or antibiotics in the wild, there were no second chances. Wounds worsened, leading to agonizing deaths. Many were found clinging to life, their bodies ravaged, the surrounding earth bearing witness to their desperate struggle. Still, the dangers didn't deter them. Fortune waited in grizzly country, where the fur trade thrived. Every man who entered grizzly territory understood one fundamental truth. Here, you weren't the hunter, you were the hunted. Wolves and cougars were no less deadly than the grizzly. Though their methods differed, the brutal outcome was the same. A single error could be catastrophic. Wolves were intelligent, relentless hunters and scavengers. When hunger or disease twisted their instincts, they became something far more terrifying. At the 1833 rendezvous, a gathering of mountain men and indigenous traders, a rabid wolf silently slipped into camp under the cover of darkness. It attacked sleeping men, its fevered mind driving its snapping jaws. Warren Ferris, a trapper present, later recounted the horror. The wolf mauled several men before vanishing back into the shadows like a ghost, but the damage was done. Days later, some of those bitten fell ill, their bodies failing, their minds descending into madness. One young man disappeared entirely, his fate lost to the wilderness. Even healthy wolves could be bold. In 1881, Jim Baker's daughter experienced this firsthand. While gathering cows near their Colorado homestead, a gray wolf appeared. It didn't lunge or snarl, just stood there watching. She tried to scare it off, but it didn't flinch. She threw a rock, yet it remained. This was the kind of predator mountain folk lived with, one that didn't always attack, but never backed down. Then there were the cougars, silent, unseen. A cougar would never give a warning growl. You'd never hear it coming. Mountain men rarely spoke of fighting cougars as they did bears or wolves, not because the threat was lesser, but because those who got too close seldom lived to tell about it. The big cat's terrifying screams would pierce the night, unsettling even the most hardened men. Livestock vanished. Sometimes people did too. While direct accounts of attacks on trappers were few, the fear was very real. You didn't need to see a cougar to know it was there. You just felt the subtle shift in the world when you weren't alone. The wilderness offered no respite. If the beasts didn't claim you, something else would. The very land itself was an adversary, merciless, unpredictable, and always ready to kill. Danger number 2, harsh weather conditions. Beyond the claws and fangs of the wild, mountain men battled an even colder, more pervasive threat: nature's fury. The mountains held no regard for whether you were tired, hungry, or injured. They didn't care if you were prepared. When the weather turned, you either adapted or you died. The American West was a raw, untamed land, its climate as brutal as its terrain. Winters struck with crushing force, burying the landscape under deep snow and plummeting temperatures to bone-cracking lows. Storms rolled in swiftly, blackening the sky and transforming clear paths into blinding whiteout nightmares. A single error, misjudging the wind, delaying camp, could prove fatal. James Kimmon knew this intimately. He and his party were deep in the Rockies when a blizzard descended, without warning, without mercy. The wind howled, driving snow sideways, cutting through their clothes like knives. They had no choice but to dig in, huddle beneath a makeshift shelter, and wait. Days passed, supplies dwindled, the cold gnawed at their bones, but they held on. Survival in these mountains wasn't just about endurance. It demanded an intimate knowledge of the land, the ability to read its subtle signs, and the foresight to move before disaster struck. Trappers learned to stitch their own wounds, set their own broken bones, relying solely on their wits and sheer grit. They wrapped themselves in stiffened deerskin for warmth, fished frozen rivers for food, and fought to keep their fires burning against the relentless wind. But no amount of skill could truly tame the mountains. A sudden storm could leave a man stranded, lost, and freezing to death beneath an uncaring sky. And winter was just one of the dangers. Danger number 3, perilous landscapes. The very ground they traversed often proved deadly. Narrow canyons, deceptively offering passage, could quickly transform into raging torrents during flash floods, even if the storm was miles away. These walls of water and debris left no escape. Rivers, a vital resource, were equally unpredictable. Heavy rains could turn them into deadly traps, with powerful currents capable of sweeping away a man and his gear in an instant. A single misstep on a slick rock or in a deep channel, especially with a panicked horse, could lead to disaster. The mountains themselves presented their own array of hazards. Unstable loose shale, hidden crevasses that could swallow the unwary, and sudden destructive rock slides. A fall or burial beneath tons of earth was a constant risk. The western deserts were no less merciless, characterized by scorching days and freezing nights, with water often a cruel mirage. Getting lost meant a swift, silent death. Even the forests, seemingly safer, concealed dangers like dense underbrush that tangled feet, hidden drop-offs, and treacherous fallen logs. Every step demanded absolute attention. Beyond these physical features, severe snowstorms could bury trails and trap the unprepared, while lightning strikes frequently ignited devastating wildfires. Survival in this environment demanded profound respect for the land. A single error could be fatal. Danger number 4, sickness and scarcity of care. Beyond the external threats, mountain men battled their own bodies. Infections and diseases were a constant menace. A minor scratch could fester, and a fever could quickly consume a man from within. In this isolated wilderness, there were no doctors, no medicines, only the land as a silent observer. Cholera was a particularly insidious killer. A single contaminated drink of water or meal could transform a healthy individual into a corpse within a day, marked by violent diarrhea and unstoppable vomiting that rapidly drained the body of life. There was no treatment or cure. The Oregon Trail tragically illustrates this, with countless pioneers succumbing to cholera between 1849 and 1855, buried in shallow, unmarked graves. Diaries from the time recount the horror, describing the trail as a graveyard, where multiple burials were a daily occurrence. Even those who avoided cholera faced other deadly ailments like smallpox, tuberculosis, and dysentery, which claimed more lives than conflicts or accidents. Rivers, beyond being physical barriers, were also carriers of disease. The lack of medical infrastructure made every illness a life-threatening ordeal, leaving survival to grit, crude remedies, superstition, and sheer luck. Children, too, understood the stakes, as one testimonial noted disease, rather than weather or native encounters, as the primary danger. Danger number 5. Hunger and famine. The reliance on hunting and foraging made starvation a persistent threat. When game disappeared or men ventured into unfamiliar territories, hunger became an immediate danger. Mountain men often lived year-round in remote areas, their survival directly tied to finding wild game. When animals were scarce, desperation set in, leading them to consume rotting flesh or even boiled leather. Their isolation amplified the challenge of finding food, forcing them to depend solely on their wits and knowledge of the land. Entire expeditions faced dire food shortages. The copper mine expedition of 1819–1822, led by Sir John Franklin, serves as a grim historical example of the desperate measures taken to survive extreme food scarcity. To combat this ever-present threat, mountain men adopted preservation techniques from indigenous peoples, such as making pemmican, a high-calorie mixture of dried meat, fat, and sometimes berries, which sustained them during long journeys when fresh game was unavailable. Despite these strategies, food uncertainty was a constant companion, demanding resilience, adaptability, and deep ecological knowledge. Danger number 6. Conflicts with indigenous peoples. The frontier was far from empty. It was the ancestral home of numerous indigenous tribes. While some tribes engaged in trade with the mountain men, others viewed them as trespassers, leading to frequent and bloody confrontations. One of the earliest major clashes was the Arikara War in 1823. When William Henry Ashley and 70 trappers encroached upon Arikara territory on the Missouri River, simmering tensions escalated. The Arikara, attributing past betrayals and unfavorable trade to these outsiders, launched a pre-dawn attack. 14 trappers were killed and 10 wounded, with the survivors barely escaping by boat, leaving their fallen comrades behind. This incident prompted the first large-scale military response beyond the Missouri, as U.S. soldiers retaliated by burning villages and pushing back warriors, sending a clear message. The frontier was a battleground. Individuals like John Coulter, a veteran of the Lewis and Clark expedition, experienced this danger firsthand. In 1809, while trapping near the Three Forks of the Missouri, he was captured by the Blackfoot. His companion was immediately killed, while Coulter was stripped naked and forced to run for his life, pursued like prey. Barefoot and bleeding, he endured miles of rough terrain before diving into a river and hiding beneath driftwood as his pursuers searched. He eventually emerged and walked 200 miles to safety, a testament to his incredible endurance. Some conflicts spanned years, fought across mountains and plains. Kit Carson, a legendary frontiersman, spent decades navigating a complex relationship of trade and intermittent warfare with indigenous tribes. The Blackfoot were a particularly persistent adversary, renowned for their swift and devastating ambushes. Carson and his men often retaliated with equal ferocity, with some expeditions devolving into continuous skirmishes, highlighting the brutal nature of survival. Not all engagements were hit-and-run tactics. Some escalated into full-scale battles. At Pierre's Hole in 1832, in present-day Idaho, American trappers and their Nez Perce allies clashed fiercely with a Gros Ventre war party. What began as tension erupted into a ferocious battle involving arrows and musket fire. Despite the trappers' firearms, the Gros Ventre resisted fiercely. The trappers ultimately held their ground, but the encounter underscored that control of the land would be paid for in blood. As settlers pushed deeper into indigenous territories, the violence intensified. The Sand Creek Massacre of 1864 exemplified this tragic escalation, where a Colorado militia attacked a peaceful Cheyenne and Arapaho village, slaughtering up to 163 people, primarily women and children. This act of extermination triggered swift and brutal retaliation, leading to widespread raids, ambushes, and burned settlements, igniting a cycle of violence across the West. For mountain men, a single misstep into the wrong territory could transform them from hunters into the hunted. The West was not merely a land of opportunity, but a volatile battlefield where every sunrise could mark a man's last day. Danger number 7. Isolation and psychological strain. Beyond the obvious physical threats, the wilderness wielded a quieter, more insidious weapon: isolation and its profound psychological strain. A mountain man could spend months, even years, without hearing another human voice. There was no established law, no familiar comforts, and no friendly faces, only the unending expanse of trees, rivers, and sky. While some individuals thrived in this solitude, others succumbed to its overwhelming pressures. The profound loneliness gnawed at the mind. Lacking anyone to confide in or seek support from, the constant weight of survival, the daily gamble against nature, predators, and hostile encounters, took a severe toll. The strain manifested in various ways. Some survivors became reclusive, barely speaking upon returning to civilization, while others grew restless and reckless. This phenomenon was sometimes referred to as prairie madness by Great Plains settlers, characterized by depression, paranoia, and even violence, symptoms eerily familiar among mountain men, shaped by the same brutal solitude. Those who endured found various coping mechanisms. Some forged deep connections with native tribes, learning their customs, taking wives, and finding a sense of belonging. Others eagerly anticipated the annual rendezvous, a wild, boisterous gathering where trappers traded goods, exchanged stories, and reaffirmed their shared humanity. Some found solace in writing, while others resorted to talking to themselves, to the trees, or even to the ghosts of lost friends. To survive in such an environment required more than mere physical strength. A man had to make peace with his own mind, for the pervasive silence could prove as deadly as a grizzly bear. The wild had no regard for strength, intelligence, or skill. It only cared about survival. Some men succeeded, many did not. In the end, the land always prevailed.